I'm going to stand here. But if you see and you can hear, I mean, I'll just not look at you.
Okay, it's my pleasure today to welcome our seminar speaker, Annie Zaenen from Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. Annie has done some important work during her career, starting with very interesting work on the syntax of Icelandic, and has done a lot of work on the syntax of a variety of Germanic languages, of Dutch, and a number of others. And since she moved to Park, she's also done a lot of important work at trying to make computational sense of linguistic theories, from building large grammars to trying to understand the relationship between finite state tools and technology and theoretical linguistics, as well as work in summarization and machine translation. Recently, she's departed on a project where she's been trying to, again, make sense of the move between statistical methods in natural language processing, computational linguistics, and issues in theoretical linguistics, and she's going to talk to us about that today. So welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay, indeed. So what I want to talk about today is called rather mysteriously, but you will figure out what that means, boundaries to the influence of animates. And it is work, of course, what I present here is my responsibility, but the work that it is based on was done at Stanford more than at Park, actually, with John Bresnan and Tom Wasso and some of our students there, to get the names of. I'll first motivate a little bit why I talk about what it is and why I talk about this here, apart from the fact that it is on my mind. Okay, kind of stuff. So, and then I'll talk a bit about the corpus studies that we have done, the relevance, a little bit about the relevance for production models, so that's psychological models, and then I have a lot of caveats about where we are in this particular kind of enterprise. So the kind of the why and I talk about this here and the what have on the one hand some bearing on evolution of syntactic theorizing, and then there is the specific stuff that I will introduce. So I think that what I want to illustrate with this talk, I mean, as a very small illustration, is some kind of new directions of methods in theoretical linguistics, where one is going from intuitions to corpus research, and then from categorical ideas about grammaticality to more statistical ones. Now, this is so old that it is new, okay, kind of stuff, because this is basically what I did in the 19th century. Up to a certain sense, they did a kind of corpus research and they did statistical analysis. But of course, with the fact that there are new tools, on the one hand, that corpora are electronically available, and that also the statistical analysis methods have been streamlined and have become more powerful and so forth, this, of course, takes a slightly different type of has become a slightly different enterprise from what it was in the 19th century. I'll say a couple of words why this might not be just interesting for theoretical linguistics, but also for NLP things. And so the very specific, the problem I want to address is what determines how we express an idea. Of course, I mean, we can talk for years about that. More specifically, what determines the choice between syntactic paraphrases, and that is what the broad project that this research is part of was interested in. And then, even more specifically, the little part that I will address in a more technical way is what is the role of animacy in the syntactic realization of NPs, basically, okay, kind of stuff. So this is a very small question, okay, kind of stuff. So, okay, so let me then say a bit more about what this is, what we mean by syntactic paraphrases, what the theoretical relevance may be, and what the relevance may be for language generation and language production. So this is part of a project that was a project between Stanford and Edinburgh, so-called link project, can tell you more about if you're interested. And that was looking at different syntactic ways to express the same idea. And so basic examples of this is John gave a book to Mary, a book was given to Mary by John, etc., etc. The main things that we worked on were sentence-based, but there was one type of construction that is actually an NP construction, so yesterday's lecture and the lecture of yesterday, that type of alternation, which is also a paraphrase kind of thing. Okay, so I don't have to define, I guess, what the syntactic paraphrase is, but the idea is the same content words, the same meaning, but a different structure, basically. Okay, I understand. So one of the questions, of course, that is important is what influences the appropriateness of a given paraphrase. They're all grammatical, we're assuming. We're not talking about ungrammatical stuff. So what influences the appropriateness of a given paraphrase? And factors that have been discussed in linguistic literature include information status, animacy, length of constituents, and the like. Okay. So what the LINK project did was annotate a part of the parsed part of the switchboard corpus for those factors, and then do the exploitation of that further annotated corpus. And if you want to learn more about how the annotations were done, there are two papers on it. One was given at LREC, which is about the information structure, and the other one was given at the workshop of the ACL last year, and that is about the animacy. I'll say a couple of words about this, not a lot, but a couple of things.
The first one, where you say it was annotated for information status, is this corpus now available, or is this still with me?
Yeah, this is. We haven't worked this out yet completely, but in principle, this should be available for anybody. It is unfortunately a rather small corpus. I'll come back to that. But so if you have the rights to the switchboard, which you have to get from LDC, then you can get the rights to what we did with it. I mean, there's no further strings attached in principle.
And this is a tree-banked portion, which is...
Right, that is what I call the parse thing, is the tree. And then for animacy, I might as well say this now, we annotated everything that is tree-banked, but then the information status, that was a little bit more complicated, and they did only a part of it, so it is not very much, unfortunately. That's one of the problems, but okay, it is what it is, and you're welcome to it. Okay, so now these factors that we annotated for let me say a little bit more about them. This is the type of things that linguists, especially anthropological linguists, have talked about in terms of the Silverstein hierarchy. So which says first and second persons are more important than proper names in the third person, than human third persons, than animate, and then inanimates. And what does it mean more important? I'll come back to that, the notion of salience in a moment. So the Silverstein hierarchy was proposed on the basis of basically anthropological linguistics, and it captures the idea that information status and animacy and these factors play a role in the grammatical realization of entities, but it also tries to establish a total linear order on these, and that's most likely not the right idea. At least the way we approach it, we don't try to do that, and the data that we have doesn't suggest that that's the right way to look at it. So we basically split the idea in two, and we are not the only ones that have proposed to do that. So in one, which you could call derived accessibility, which is information structure, where we follow the annotation followed the ideas of Ellen Prince on this that you might know about from Penn. So she distinguishes between hearer status and discourse status, so what the hearer knows and can infer from what he or she already knows, and then the discourse status, what has been mentioned already in the text or the dialogue or whatever that at hand. And so this gives rise to three categories. I always thought there were only three categories, so it is new in the discourse and it's new for the hearer. And for instance, if just you say, a man came in, okay, it's new in a thing. It is old or mediated, and that can be so it is new in the discourse, but old for the hearer, and then it can be completely old. So completely old is is typically a pronoun, of course. That's kind of old information. John came in, he sat down. And then this mediated thing is actually something in the middle there where you can infer things like, for instance, if you say, I tried to open the door, the knob fell off. Okay, so if you have the door, then you can immediately infer the knob. Also things like, I have two groups, the first one did that, the second one did that. Okay, you have introduced the idea of group, but not the first group, so they're all mediated. So that is the notion. Then I thought the thing that it would be old in the discourse and new for the hearer doesn't exist. But once I tried to explain this to somebody, I went to the next slide and he said, what did you say? Okay, so it was all definitely old in the discourse, but it was still new for that hearer. Okay, kind of stuff. So if people don't pay attention, you can get the case. Okay. So we will leave that out of the picture for the rest of the time. Okay, yeah?
Actually, I'm wondering if another possibility for that bubble would be cases where you say something like, I don't know, it was a cold morning and Mr. Bleecker opened the door. The grocer had never been through this particular door before. So you're supposed to infer that Mr. Bleecker is a grocer.
Yeah. If you stylistically, you can also get plays on this, right? Yeah, right. We haven't investigated that.
Would those go in the bottom left?
I think I don't know how I haven't seen any of the examples in what annotated, and I don't know whether they would put it in the mediated or in the old information. Definitely not in the new. But I don't know. So, but it is true. It is another case where okay. So that is the basic idea about derived accessibility, and then. So about inherent accessibility is this notion of animacy. So because we call the other thing derived accessibility because it depends on the context in a particular text. Okay, it makes it old or new. There is nothing about the reference of things that makes them old or new, except things like the moon and so forth. But the animacy depends not on the linguistic expression itself. In principle, it depends on the inherent property of the entity referred to. Now, and so this has been called animacy. Now, what this distinction exactly is unfortunately, like a lot of linguistic distinctions, kind of cognitively not completely clear, because so people say there is a different way languages treat things that refer to humans in a different way than they treat things that refer to chairs, for instance, or maybe it is humans and higher animals, or maybe where the exact cutoff point between these two is not. It's not clear whether it is a binary distinction or whether it is a distinction that should be made with at least 3 or 4 classes. It's not completely clear. I'll say a little bit what we got in our annotation and so forth about this, but that definitely will not solve the problem. But so what underlies this distinction is also not completely clear. Okay, so people have tried to kind of explain it in terms of empathy or things like that, things that are more similar to myself, are the ones that are higher on the hierarchy than things that we consider as being very different from ourselves. People haven't gotten very far on that. It's not clear that if one looks cross-linguistically, that the way that things should be cut off is the same in different languages. That's also something that's totally up for grabs. I mean, but there's not much enough done on it. But that it plays a role has been shown. The notion very generally has been shown, and you don't have to look necessarily at very exotic languages. You can look at Navajo. No, you can look at Spanish. Okay, kind of stuff where you have this distinction that is well known about if you say I saw an inanimate object, you say like in English, I saw the book via el libro. But if you talk about an animate, then you say al niño, for instance. Okay, so you have a different marker. Now, this does not only depend on animacy, and that's kind of crucial in a lot of these things. They rarely depend just on one factor. They tend to depend on several factors. And an example from Navajo there, where you get just a different marking on the verb when you have, so when the girl burnt the potato, or when the potato burnt the girl, you just have a different kind of marker, and this is not a passive. This is just the difference between the animacy of the thing. Okay, so that is the second type of dimension, if you want, that we want to talk about. Now, as I said, so in Navajo, in languages like Navajo, this is a distinction that really makes a grammatical difference. So you have to use this ye when you have an animate, and you have to use the be when you have something like the potato or the chair or whatever the exact notion of animacy. In the languages like English, you do not use this as a categorical distinction. Okay, well, there is not. I don't know of anything that absolutely depends on it. Actually, dative alternation that I'll talk a little bit about comes the closest, but there is nothing that absolutely depends on it. So the question, a theoretical question that arises with these observations is how do we model whatever is universal in grammar in these things. And one way of thinking about it is to say, okay, you have a parameter for animacy, for instance, and you turn it off or on. Okay, kind of in some languages it is turned on, and they are attuned to this, and in other languages you turn it off, and that's the end of it. And as long as you think about grammar as a categorical kind of phenomenon, syntax a kind of categorical type of phenomenon, that's, I guess, the way you do it, because you don't look at anything else. Okay, that is one way to do it. But you can also think about it in a more non-categorical approach, and actually, one way of doing it is actually an OT type of approach. You could have to this type of things. But you could, or you can have a statistical approach, and then you say it might matter in all languages, but it is a question of preference. So it is a categorical distinction. It's just a limit case of the distinction that is present in all languages. And the way we are going to look at it is that way. Okay, so we'll just say, because now, if you look at it as, if you say a priori that it is categorical, then of course you will not see the other data, because you will never look at them. So whereas if you look at it, say it could be statistical, then you will look and see whether there is some evidence to say the distinction is there. And then, of course, you still have, in both cases, you still have to explain where it comes from. That is a different thing, and we'll come a little bit to it. But it's certainly not explained in either of the approaches. But so the question is, okay, we know that it's categorical in some languages. Let's look at other languages and see how it comes out. Okay, so this type of research has also relevance for language production, but I don't want to go into more theoretical things about language production now. I'll come back to that later. So language production is the term that I will use to talk about how humans produce sentences, whereas language generation is the term how computers do it. Okay, kind of stuff. And so, and of course, it is eventually important for generation. Okay, so if you do generation without information about these factors that influence these choices between different paraphrases, you get extremely boring stuff and sometimes inappropriate stuff. But if you do random variation, then you can kind of, you risk to get things like a book was given to Mary by John as a present. Mary, she liked the book, and the book Mary read from cover to cover. It was John who was, and so forth, which is totally doesn't sounds like garbage, although it is all grammatical. So it is because all the things are chosen against the thing. Of course, how you then approach this, that's another problem. So it is interesting to know about these factors and how they play a role in generation. And that was one of the motivations for this link project that we did, which was actually an eventually kind of computationally based project. Okay. Okay, so now what makes this difficult to study in English, or makes it that one has to look at different ways of doing it than normal, the standard methodology of theoretical linguistics, is that for that type of factors, introspection is even more unreliable than it is for just grammaticality judgments. Okay, so it is extremely difficult to figure out in which context something would be more or less right. So, and especially then you have also a lot of factors that interact and that even are correlated. Like, for instance, if you have newer information, tends to be in longer constituents and so forth. So, if you want to tease out all the different factors that play a role, just doing this on the basis of introspection, nobody would dream of. So as long as you think about introspection, you're basically stuck with the categorical model, because it doesn't work for anything else. One can discuss whether it works for that, but that is the place where here it definitely doesn't work. So. So we have to find other models and ways of modeling things, and I'll get to what we got to. And I'll do that in the context of looking at two hypotheses about animacy and syntactic realization, and look a bit at data that is compatible with both, and then I'll look at data that can distinguish between the two ways of saying it. And here we come to some hypotheses that have been made about language production, actually. So there is this idea that salience influences the way the grammatical function realization of a semantic argument. So following, again, a hierarchy, a syntactic accessibility hierarchy of saying subject, object, second object, and obliques, things like that. So the higher you are on the salience hierarchy, the higher you will naturally be on this semantic hierarchy. That's the basic idea. Okay, understand? So, and then there is another way of looking at it and say, well, anything that is more salient in this psycholinguistic, psychological way is just said earlier in the sentence. Just you say it first because you have it in your mind, and there it comes out. Okay, kind of stuff. So that is the thing. Now, what salience is in these psychological or nearly psychological literature is basically an amalgam of these functional factors that I was talking about. But the way people talk about it in this in the literature up to now is that there is just one notion of salience. So it is you have a little bit of animacy, and you have a little bit of old, new, whatever it exactly is, and so forth, and that makes something salient, and you can again say which things are more salient than others, and once you have decided what is salient, that will influence then the grammatical realization in one of these two ways, for instance, and that is it. And as I will want to show that the data that we have shows that salience is actually not something that you just can calculate once and forever, kind of stuff, that it will depend on the grammatical constructions that you're looking at, which is not particularly astonishing, but it's not the way people think about it.
So I wonder whether, to say that there's only one notion of salience, do you mean for all ways of telegraphing information structure, or could there be one salience measure that determines linear order and another one that determines stress, or?
Well, the way people talk about it is as if there is one notion. In the literature that I know, they talk about it as if there is one notion, and then it could lead to various realizations. I am going to argue that there is not one notion of salience, but on the basis of a very limited amount of data. But kind of okay. So, but that's the way. I don't know that anybody has ever said, I can't live without the idea that there is one notion of saliency, but people talk about it as if there is only one. Okay, kind of stuff. So it is not. So if you look at Ariel or these books, the people that talk about this, that's the way they talk. Okay. So if you look at these two hypotheses about how salience influences grammatical function, and you look at something like animacy, an animacy component of this, then there is a lot of stuff that has been done that is compatible with both hypotheses if you just stick to English, because in English, of course, the subject comes before, the object comes before, so you have the linear order mimics the kind of thing in a simple sentence. That is the thing. So for instance, there is some work by psychologists like Prat Salam that look, this is an elicitation study, not a corpus study, okay? So you look at descriptions of pictured scenes, like for instance, there is a swing that can hit a scooter or a swing can hit a man, and then you look at how this, you ask people to describe the picture, and you look at what they say, okay, I understand. And so, for instance, in that type of situation, you will get something like the man was hit by the swing, you will get, if you keep everything else constant, except for the fact that the patient in certain cases is animate, and in other cases it is inanimate. Okay, so then you will see that people in 78% of the cases in English in that study, people will say the man was hit by the swing, but the scooter was hit by the swing will be said only in 43.5%, and otherwise people will use the active there. Okay, so there is a difference. So it looks like if the thing is animate, it gets promoted to a subject more easily than it is not. Okay, and there is other experiments, and there is other information about that in theories in papers by K. Bock and MacDonald and other people.
Is this linguistics or is this psychology?
This is psychology, if you want, but I'm not make a difference between the two in my talk here. Okay, so this was a pure, but this was done by a psychologist. If that is what the question is, this was done by a psychologist. Okay, so so what we did about.
There was a previous title, the title of the previous slide said data compatible with both hypotheses.
Right.
So what are the two hypotheses?
Oh, this is the old information in the discourse and the new for the speaking phenomenon. Okay,
right.
So, sorry.
There are two notions of salience.
No, the notion of salience, sorry, I was most likely not clear. The notion of salience is the same here, the kind of something is more prominent in your mind than something else, okay? Then the two hypotheses are, you're going to realize it as the most prominent thing as a subject. Right. Let's say, and then blah, blah, blah. So the other thing is you're going to say the thing that is most salient in your mind first in the sentence.
Okay.
And in English, in a simple sentence, you can't distinguish them. Okay, so that's why I said that it's compatible with both
So
hypotheses.
whether it's a linear order or a structural hierarchy.
Right. So that is maybe a more clear way to put it.
And just to be clear, they're hard to distinguish because the syntactic accessibility hierarchy is sort of syntax.
Yeah, the syntactic, I think that is shown by the test. The hypothesis is that it is surface. Otherwise, these data would not. Right. Would not be relevant to that thing. Right. Okay. So that is one way of looking at it, and that is one way that has been established. So then. Another way to try to establish something like that is by corpus study, and that is the type of thing that we did. I already said a little bit about this annotation that we did for the switchboard. I'll say a little bit more about it now. Okay, so for information status, this was annotated in a hierarchical way. So we made on the one hand a difference between old, inferable or mediated is the same, okay, kind of stuff. So, and new, and in old there were a lot of different subcategories that were also annotated. That in general the reliability of the subcategories was not as well. It was okay. I'll give the statistics later, but for the bigger categories, it was definitely better than for the smaller categories. In the animacy markup, where we did a whole parsed subcorpus, which is something like 600 dialogues. I don't remember how many sentences it is, but 600 dialogues. We used a lot of different categories. One thing I was particularly interested in, and we didn't get anywhere with, is the difference or the similarity between humans and organizations. Okay, whether they would be treated the same way, but I can tell you, no luck there. Then we also put in some categories like vehicles and intelligent machines to see that, but there was just not enough data to do anything with. Okay, kind of stuff. So we smooshed all those together as animate, and then as inner animate we use place, time, concrete entities, and non-concrete entities, basically. Kind of stuff. And that is basically what the statistics will be done on, because the rest that was too fine-grained. We couldn't do anything with it.
So when the annotators are marking up information status, I guess the annotation guidelines say only look at the material before this mention for determining that. In other words, don't try to guess the information status from the fact that it was occurring in an oblique position.
Oh yeah, they were not supposed to guess it from that. They would look at the text and do an interpretation of the text and only look at
Right,
that.
they should only look at the stuff in the previous sentences.
Well, it could have been in the same sentence if it was
Sure.
reflexive or something like that. But okay, so and yeah.
Do you mean to say that you coded with two categories, animate versus
No, we
inanimate?
coded with all these categories, but then we mushed them together for the analysis.
But you did not differentiate second person.
No, that is
from
not
third
that we didn't do in this study. We took animacy in the limited sense
In the
I
limited
was explaining it. Right.
Why did you collapse vehicle in with animates? I mean, it's sort of the issues you said before. It's not clear where the boundary is.
Right. And so, well, you say the ship she, okay, kind of stuff. So there are and there is a lot of in child language. There is actually quite a bit about that children treat moving cars and things like that in like animates. I don't remember now what the exact things is, but there is some. So we just wanted to see whether there was any reflex of that in the type of things we did. There was one dialogue about cars, and as far as I could see, they were not treated as animates
Right,
at
so
all.
and there is putting them into that category that just messes up the data.
It's
Given that it's
right.
not clear.
Right, we shouldn't have done it. But we had to put them somewhere. We had to put them
I could
somewhere.
argue that it is because, we often, when we talk about actions of vehicles, they're actually the actions of the drivers of the vehicle. But we had attributed them to the
That is, of
vehicle.
course, that is.
The car turned right.
Right, but that is, of course, one of the factors. I don't want to talk about that here now too much, but that is another talk. Is about the metonymy and so forth makes all these things. People, we were hoping we would tell them, don't think about the expression, think about what it refers to. Okay, so calculate all that in and annotate that. I'm not sure we got what we wanted. I mean, that's one of the things. So eventually, these fine-grained distinctions, to anticipate a bit on what I was saying later, we don't have, for the fine-grained distinctions, we don't have a method, because what we did was not good enough. I mean, it was not good enough for the annotation. But the thing is that most of the things were humans or concrete or non-concrete entities, and the rest goes out all in the wash, even if the annotation had been better. Okay, except for the organization maybe. If the annotation had been better, it wouldn't have statistically not relevant, because there was not enough data, except for maybe for the organizations. Okay,
So every MP gets one of the tags in the upper set and one in the lower set.
Right. Well, actually, what we did, we gave them these different. Yeah, one of the tags. And
And the second set, you could also have done it without the discourse. You could have just listed all the MPs and said, without the discourse, but not without the sentence, okay, kind of stuff, because you get these things, you see, things that you actually got, like with organization, is the organization, if you say IBM announced a new product, is this a human or is this an organization, okay, so this or Washington or all these type of things, so you have to have that information, because otherwise you don't know what the referent is at all, okay, kind of stuff. So okay. Okay, so this was the basic setup of the what we tried to do with the corpus. Yeah, okay. So then one of the first studies that was done was the dative alternation, an old favorite of a lot of linguistic theories and so forth. Okay, so this was done basically by Joan and a student, and then a guy, a statistical linguist, Ryan, that gave some advice on how to do that. So, and to remind you, this is the alternation between John gave a book to Mary, okay, where you have the book as the theme and the object, to Mary, who is the recipient, and an oblique in that case, or John gave Mary
which is now still the recipient, but has become the object in the general analysis of these things. A book, which remains the theme, but has become a secondary object or something that is supposed to be lower on the syntactic hierarchy that is hypothesized for these things. Okay, kind of stuff. And so what one found in that study is pervasive correlations among all the factors. So pronouns are, they looked at a couple more factors than the ones that I have described up to now, at some more formal factors like pronouns and definiteness and things like that. So pronouns tend to be short, definite, in discourse old, and usually animate, but they're not always like that. But if you would just look at one kind of give a monovariable analysis, you would not know which of the factors it is that really plays a role. So this has led previous researchers indeed to explain this effect in terms of one or the other, and there is a lot of literature saying, no, it is animacy, no, it is old and new, and basically what we found is everybody is right, of course, but you have to figure out how much the variables play a role. And so to do that, we used a mixed logistic regression model to control for all these variables. So we extracted out of the switchboard all the alternating data. So there they did more markup than actually was done in the Link project. They extended the markup for the old and new stuff. And what one found is all the factors play a role, but you cannot reduce them. You cannot say, okay, the fact that it is long or short, or that it is a pronoun or definite and so forth, cannot be reduced to the fact that it is old information. For instance, they really play, there is a residual kind of importance that for all the factors, okay, kind of stuff. So so we did. They did this on the switchboard, and they did this also on the Wall Street Journal corpus, and annotated that. And by and large, for spoken and written language, it came out the same. So for this particular thing, so here, oops, yeah, this is okay what I said. So here, just to give one little slide of the thing, here you can see the kind of the factor for animacy was this kind of odd ratios that we should have calculated. So it is, I don't know, this is just a coefficients, I think. So it's rather important for this choice of the, if it is plus, it is the NP-PP thing. So basically, if the recipient is inanimate, then it is an important factor for choosing the NP-PP, the 2 construction. Okay. Okay, so this was this is the study that defined a certain methodology, and then, but of course doesn't distinguish between the 2 hypotheses that I put up that I chose to be interested in. Okay, which is one of the things. So because being in English, so to distinguish between these 2 hypotheses, one can either look at. Sorry, is that a question?
I was just wondering what GF stands for.
Grammatical functions. Kind of subject, object, and that type of stuff. So to look at the difference between the hypotheses, one could look at other languages, or one could look at some constructions in English where actually this canonical word order is not the word order between subject first, object, and so forth, is not respected. Okay, kind of stuff. And so, what we did, given we were working on English, is the latter, and then I'll also talk a little bit about some data about the former kind of stuff. So what we actually did then was look at leftist locations and topicalizations, where you get something in front of the subject in English, okay, kind of stuff. So, and we did this again on that same part of the switchboard. Unfortunately, the student who is mainly involved in this didn't feel like annotating more. So we are a little bit in this problem here with not having too much data, especially for topicalizations, okay, kind of stuff. This is really very few data, and that's one of the caveats that I want to say here about what I am telling you. Leftist locations, there were a little bit more in this thing. So, okay, so we then looked at the same factors in that, or similar factors, unfortunately, not exactly the same factors. So so to remind you what these constructions are. So topicalization is something like money has, brains he hasn't. So where you have something pre-posed before the subject, and then there is in the sentence a whole, okay, something that corresponds to it that you can indicate with a trace if that is the way you do these things, okay, kind of stuff. So with leftist location, it is that guy, I met him in last week. You have some kind of a pronominal copy in the sentence, and the discourse functions of these two things are similar but not exactly the same. I'm not going to talk directly about this here. The statistics we got out of it is actually are more telling about the sameness than about the difference, but again, we might not have enough data to really get the rest. Okay, so now the way I will talk about these things in structural terms is something that it has been used in linguistics. It's a very old-fashioned kind of linguistics. Okay, so you have if you have a simple sentence, you have what was called a sentence in the good old days, and then called an IP, and that's now blossomed in all kinds of P's, but that are irrelevant to my purpose here. But so, and that is the domain of the subcategorized functions, so that John saw Mary, John read a book, and also that are simple IP kind of things in our way of thinking about it here. And then you have a domain, a higher domain that is called the CPO, was called S-bar, kind of where you have the landing site of all these called overlay functions that in certain by certain people. That the leftist location and the topicalization, to give it with the sentence that sentences what we have. This would be the very basic structures that one would propose for these things. Okay, so this is all I'm going to talk about structural linguistics. So don't get afraid. So this is just to have some way of talking about the things. Okay, so this is standard but old-fashioned way of representing this stuff. Okay, and so one thing to be pointed out, and that might come up in this discussion, is that to be interpreted, something that is in this, in that domain of the overlay functions, has to be actually kind of linked to the material in the IP to get an interpretation. You can do this in several ways, but it has to be linked. A factor that we ignored in our analysis, but that might be important. Okay, so. So again, we looked at all these things. So we did what I said before. We had the animacy defined the way we did before. We have information structure defined the way we said before. We then also controlled for grammatical function, for grammatical weight as number of words, and for speaker ID, kind of to see whether there would be extreme differences and stuff like that. We applied the same type of model that we had before with the speaker ID put in as a random factor. And what we found is that for leftist location, all factors except animacy were significant. And for topicalization, one got actually kind of an anti-animacy effect. And this anti-animacy effect is rather recent, and I have no explanation for it. I'm just, so the generalization that I want to make here is this doesn't follow the same type of saliency hierarchy than the one that you found for subjects and subcategorized elements. Okay, so more work needs to obviously.
So these are factors where what you're doing is trying to assess how likely it is to produce a leftist location or topic compared to the canonical word.
Right, yeah, that is what we did. Yeah, so factors that played a role for the choice between the both. So we took the grammatical function into.
And are you controlling for a number of arguments? And
no, we were just given the number of data, the data we had, what could we do? So we were just having grammatical function, non-subject versus subject, basically, and then. Okay.
Okay, and the second bullet here means that inanimates were more likely to topicalize than animates?
Right.
Okay. So when you say all factors had significant leftist location, what you're thinking of is the unmarked version of those factors may be more likely to topicalize, and the marked version may be more likely not to?
Well, so actually for the information status, it was actually being mediated that correlated with being more likely to be topicalized.
Yes.
Okay, so and actually old and new, but so new very strongly, and old actually a little bit correlated with being not topicalized. It was the mediated that got topicalized.
Couldn't that fall from the fact that Animates is already privileged in the distribution of grammatical functions?
No, because we tried to control for that.
Control.
So I hope we did it the right way, but we tried to control for that. Okay. Okay, so the way one could reconstruct the hypothesis and amend it is basically that animacy in the way that we was talked about only plays a role in the IP domain and not in that other domain, and what exactly plays a role then still needs to be figured out further. And then we could keep still the idea that it is a hierarchy of subcategorized grammatical function that is relevant for thing in that particular domain. So we just make it domain dependent, okay, kind of stuff. So, okay. So unfortunately, if you look at other languages, that doesn't might not be right. I mean, again, this is a small study that was done on German. It's a corpus study on the Negra corpus, so that is around 20,000 newspaper articles that are also newspaper sentences. Sorry, that are syntactically annotated. So that is this is a different type of annotation as the one that is used in the tree bank. This is a dependency grammar annotation, but anyhow. And then one looked at the orderings there, and what Kempen and Harbusch looked at. Harbusch is misspelled actually. Looked at was the word order in these German embedded clauses, and if you remember something about German, okay, so you know that the order of these elements is rather free. The verb comes at the end, and these elements can come in different orders. So if I translate this into pseudo-English, so in German you can say things like that the book bill was given, okay, or that bill the book was given. Okay, so grammatical. Okay, so then the question is what that it the book read and things like that. Okay, so that is a type of sentence. So embedded sentences, because as you know, if you do German main clauses, a lot of other problems come up that we just don't want to talk about. Okay, so and what they found, and I give here only a little bit of the data that they came up with, is maybe I should find the exact way to say this, because so we look. So if we look at inanimate and animate subjects, then we see that for inanimate full NP subjects, direct object pronouns precede them in 64 of the cases, whereas when the subject is animate, that happens only 56% times, and they claim this is significant. Okay, this has to be compared then with animates, where it is, sorry, for the significance, it has to be compared with animates, where it is the subject that is overwhelmingly in first position under the same circumstances. That is what you see there in the thing, in the data there. Okay, the two rows that have to be compared, basically. Okay. And so you see the difference between animates and inanimates. These are the inanimates and these are the animates. And then you have everything. And then the other little thing gives us a significant distribution with indirect objects. When they are inanimate, they precede the subject only 3 times out of 42. But when the indirect object is animate, it precedes the subject 14 times out of 37. And again, they claim that if you figure that all out in percentages, and so this is significant. Okay, so now we have the problem that even in the IP domain, because these permutations in syntactic theory, people agree about this, are this is a movement, okay, so this stays within the IP domain. This is not something that builds a different kind of structure. This is syntactic theory, but anyhow, people tend to agree on that type of thing. So, okay, so what can we say about this? Well, the first thing is about production models that I haven't said much about at this moment. So, and then, so I'll say a bit about now. Okay, so let me summarize the data in the way that they're relevant. So what we get is animacy influence linearization of arguments in the IP domain, but the linearization does not always follow the grammatical function hierarchy. If you look cross languages in English, no problem with the grammatical function hierarchy, kind of stuff. So, and this is a complication. I will say a little bit more about this in a moment, because cross-linguistically, people have argued that animacy plays a role in the mapping of the grammatical functions. And this is with, looking at data that has nothing to do with linearization, that has to do with other grammatical phenomena. Okay. And then outside of the IP domain, animacy might not play a direct role. Okay, that's based on our study. And that leads to a complication because these non-IP elements precede the IP elements in the surface realization, and the production models tend to think, okay, the simple production models go like, okay, sorry, I'll come to them. I just want to say which part of a production model I'm going to talk about, because people talk in general about, they have the conceptualization that I'm not going to say anything about, and then they have formulation, which is the part I'm going to talk about, and then they have articulation, which is basically the pronunciation and the phonology and all that type of stuff, and that's also something I'm not going to talk about. So let me first say, so then in these components of the formulation, one of the models that is in fashion is actually a model that that works very well with LFG. So, but you can of course formulate it in other frameworks too. But where people say first you figure out the hierarchical relations, and then you actually do what we would call the C structure, and then there you do the linearization. So they split the formulation in two stages. Okay, kind of in that way. So, and there, then what you would get in that model is the hypothesis before all these studies that I've been referring to, that has been articulated, is basically you have animacy information, then you figure out what the subject is and the rest, but in general, one can test mainly for subjects. All these things that go lower in the hierarchy are even more difficult to actually test for them. So you start the subject, and as soon as you figured out what the subject is, you can start to talk. And at that moment, so you do in not completely in parallel, but with a little bit, semi-parallel, you do the linearization, basically. Okay, kind of that. So that is one way people have thought about it. That worked well with one of the hypotheses, namely that it was the grammatical functions that drove the kind of the importance of the animacy. So the salience information comes from the concepts here. Okay, kind of that is what you get out of the conceptualization. Okay, so now of course what the German data suggests is actually that the animacy information comes in later in the whole thing, namely on the linearization kind of thing. So, but that then, as I said, goes against the things that people have noticed for in grammar in general, namely that animacy does influence the choice of grammatical functions. And so I just give here some very abstract representation of a language in which this has been claimed, namely Chamorro. So in Chamorro, if you say John hit the chair, which is two, an animate subject and an inanimate, an animate agent and an inanimate patient, then you can say it in the active, just what I said, but the chair was hit by John is supposed to be ungrammatical. Okay, so that is so if you say John hit Bill or Bill was hit by John, both are okay because both are animate. If you say the swing hit the chair or the chair was hit by the swing, both are again okay because both are inanimate. But if you try to say the swing hit Bill, that's not grammatical in Chamorro. You have to say Bill was hit by the swing.
In the case for both are grammatical, it's some notion of salience or...
Well, it is animacy, basically.
No, in the case where they're both animate or both inanimate.
Oh, there might be other factors that play. There might be other factors that play a role. I'm abstracting away from a lot of things about Chamorro, right? But you can bring it down to that kind of thing if you just want to isolate the animacy in this particular kind of thing, right? Right, it will then depend on other factors. Okay, so this then argues for a model where animacy is going to play a role in two different places, which is of course not particularly elegant model to have. So once you start to do that, you might as well collapse all that stuff and say, okay, actually, we do not have this two-stage. We do not have this two-stage model. We just have a one-stage stage model. Okay, and there, of course, you could have a model, and that's not excluded, where you would have the discourse realization first, and that is, and then actually the choice of subject actually later than the choice of topic, let's say, or whatever you exactly call these things that are. So, and that is not excluded. So that's one way you could do it, and then you could still say you start to talk as soon as you figured out what you're going to talk about, what the topic is, kind of stuff. But then the animacy will of course not play a role there, because I've just shown that is not an important factor there. Okay. Okay, so you could just have a model where everything goes at the same time, and that is a model that has not been that has been proposed in the literature too. So there is the two-stage model and the one-stage model. So, without further ado, this kind of result is kind of a weak argument for the one-stage model instead of the two-stage model for the thing, in spite of the fact that that doesn't do any good for LFG as an encoding. But anyhow. Okay, so what is at issue here is a little bit about not so much maybe how much processing is done before linearization starts, but what type of processing is done. And so basically, what is suggested is that you have to figure out more than just subjects and objects. You have to look at these other kind of relations too. Okay, so and so the data is not compatible with the early vocalization model as it is described now, but you could adapt it if you think about it in a different way. So that is what is at issue for this kind of things. Now, okay, this is assuming that you believe everything I have told you, and maybe you have a lot of reasons not to believe it. Okay, kind of. So because the corpus statistics on which this is based is small, obviously one wants to do this better. How reliable is the annotation that we have used? I'll come to that. I'll give you a little bit of information about that. We have already talked a bit about it. Okay. Then, of course, it might be that the relevant variable that all this depends on is just not in the pot. We have not looked at it, so it is something totally different that plays a role. And now, I think that that's a little bit unlikely, given that linguists have been pondering in different languages about all these things, and so it must be something that is a little bit in the neighborhood of where we're thinking. Okay, so that would be completely something different. It's not very likely. And then a big problem is that the difference. All these studies are very heterogeneous, okay? So there is a difference in statistical analysis methods, there is a difference in data. Even in the two studies that we did, there's still not exactly the same annotation, not exactly the same corpus, and so forth. So that makes it all kind of thing.
They were both switchboard.
They were very similar. They were as similar as you might find something, but nevertheless, I mean, it is not exactly the same. And of course, then you have these elicitation things, and you have corpus studies. Are they the same? For instance, for elicitation studies, the way they have been done, obviously, they couldn't have found the stuff we did with the corpus study because they didn't set it up so that a person could have produced a topicalization, okay, kind of stuff. It was just not part of the setup, so they wouldn't have found it. But that is why it is interesting to do the different type of studies. So you think about the thing, but then one still has to see whether one gets similar results if one tries to do them in a different way. So to talk about the reliability of the annotation for 2 minutes. So for the information status, they had 2 annotators, and for the overall kappa, if you believe in that as a measure, was .84, and for the coarse grained categories, and a little bit under 80 for the subtypes, which is pretty good as far as these things go. In the animacy, if you just looked overall, we got 92 kind of inter-annotator agreement. There was with three annotators. But if that is because the category of human and non-concrete overwhelmed all the other categories, because if you then started to look the agreement between, let's say, organization and human, I mean, you couldn't do anything with it, unfortunately, kind of stuff. So that's as far as we got. The problem, another problem with this annotation is, although the corpus is available and the annotation manuals are also available and so forth, certainly for the Animacy, which I was involved in, I wouldn't feel that you could redo the thing that we did, because it's just the way the task was described to the annotators was not precise enough so that you could say, now do this in another place and do the same thing and you will get very similar results, and that's a real weakness of this whole thing. Okay, so if you want these very coarse-grained things, you can do something with this corpus, but if don't try to milk it for too much, because there is that problem. Okay, and the problem with the other. The other part also, to have this done by other annotators now, and for the information status, because we would like to have a bigger corpus there. Again, it would be, one would have to be very careful to make sure that they are doing similar things as to the ones that they.
Yes, point 9.2 is on the fine labels.
That was on the fine labels, but actually there were only two labels. Yeah, right. Yeah, it was only right. The rest, I mean, in the paper that I give a reference for, gives the statistics for the other categories, and you'll see for some it is, but it didn't. Okay. So in spite of these caveats, I want to. Draw a couple of conclusions here, at least likelihood conclusions, that these various factors that we took in consideration play a different role in the choice of different constructions. Okay, so that is the constructions like dative movement, the dative alternation, animacy plays a role, topicalization thing it doesn't play, or it plays a different role at least.
And
okay,
also statistically significant.
Yeah, they were also right. And the same was found actually for the people that looked at the genitive alternation. So yesterday's lecture, the lecture of yesterday, they found the opposite, that their animacy played a role, but that new and old information, the way it was annotated, was not significant. Okay, so they found the opposite. So basically, so the conclusion is that this notion of salience that floats around like that at least has to be thought a bit better about, and it is not just one thing that you have something in your head there, okay, and that is what's going to influence in the same way everything you do in your syntactic realization. Okay, so that's the basic, and then another thing that I didn't talk about here is that, of course, some of these factors that you get there is that on the one hand you have these kind of cognitive factors that I've been talking about, and then independent of that you have actually things like length, which is very much a realization kind of factor, and both of those things play a role, and that might be of some interest for if you think about generation models, that you have to take both of these things into account if you want to see on how, which of the paraphrases that you should generate from. Okay, so for the rest, what this study, this type of study, because this is definitely not the end of it, should give you is some kind of statistical information about which factors are important in generation and so of the different paraphrases, and you could might help to choose the right one in the right context. So here a couple of references. So the things that I talked about, and then this Pickering and Brannigan and McLean paper, that is the one that argues for a one-phase formulation kind of framework, and not for the two phases that I was kind of first talking about. Okay, okay, and that's it. Yes?
I have just one little remark that could be perhaps extended. When you were talking about that alternation in dative, you were comparing the sentences John gave Mary
A book.
an apple and John gave an apple.
To Mary.
A book.
Jo, wel voor een appel.
The book to Mary. And well, I just wonder whether, because the preposition, the case where the book is given to Mary, that case is often marked. That is the book is contextually bound, and to Mary is not. So
What do you mean with contextually
So
bound?
it is the old information.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's part of what you came out of this.
Which doesn't have to be the case in the second sentence.
Yeah,
I just wonder whether this. You were talking about you were comparing the numbers with to Animates. So
No, I was not comparing these numbers. I was just showing the numbers for animacy that it was a rather solid effect. I was not.
Rather affected by this fact that the book, in the case the preposition, is bound. So the speaker has no other option than to. He has to use this sentence if the book is bound.
Yeah, I don't understand what you mean by the book is bound.
Like, it's the old information.
Yeah, well, that is, but it is not true that you have to. I mean, what comes out of our study is that you don't have to, but that it is statistically significant that you tend to do, but it is not 100%. I mean,
Are we both talking about English?
Yes. Yeah.
so it is not 100% thing. It depends on all the other factors, okay, kind of stuff. And so it is, but it is more prevalent that it is thing. So, but I wouldn't make a categorical effect out of it in English.
In the beginning, there was a list of possible expressions, and you said that they had the same meaning. I can think about examples that you cannot use both of them, and in fact, I can show you two of them, which you can use in all contexts, either one or the second one, but never both of them.
Like which one, for instance?
Can you show
The thing. I mean, this.
Second slide or something.
Let's see. How does this go? Oh dear, how do I?
Yes, begin shows.
Oh, there is a begin show somewhere, but I don't know what that is.
That little icon on the bottom with the little screen.
Oh, there is.
One more to the right.
This one is.
No, other side. Other side.
Oh, this one. Oh, this is going to be. Go back to the beginning?
Oh.
No, it doesn't.
And now hold down the mouse.
I can't handle this thing. I mean, I don't have a. It doesn't move when I. Here, oops. Here. Okay. This. Yeah. So what?
Yes. Okay. It was a book that John gave
Yeah.
to Mary, and
What John gave Mary was the book.
these are the same.
Those two are the same.
They're the same. No, I think that you're right. I mean, if that was what you wanted to say, I think that there are actually cases where, with clefts, you can get situations where a cleft is nearly obligatory. I think that's correct. But it is discourse factors that play a role.
The meaning differs. So
Well, okay, I should have said propositional meaning. I should have said propositional meaning. I agree with you. Basically, it is a question of how one expresses the idea. I agree with what you're saying.
I was just wondering if your studies on the speech corpus might have been affected by the genre, and that maybe the same study on text data might result in different kinds of...
Yeah, that is definitely true. And for instance, well, for the dative alternation, the study was done both on spoken and written English, and came out broadly the same, okay, kind of stuff. For this type of stuff, I was thinking about, there is definitely a difference between spoken and written, okay. In spoken, you get more leftist locations and very few topicalizations. In written, you get more topicalizations and nearly no leftist locations. So that's another factor that should be taken into account. Okay, so we're not at the end of this kind of, so, yeah.
I'm wondering, so when you looked at this, you did this this analysis, and you fit this logistic regression to get all these parameters. One underlying intuition is, well, look, those are the parameters, those are the values for English. But if you look at Chamorro, if you would in fact have gotten very, very high number for one particular factor, that leads one to wonder whether there are other languages that are sort of the opposite of Chamorro, where instead of factors like animacy running the show for the mapping to grammatical function, you get this other notion of salience. Being, so whether givenness or newness, completely runs the show for mapping to grammatical function. Now there are certainly cases, languages like Czech or where you get the salience in this given new sense really running the show with respect to linear order. But at least I'm not familiar with cases where that notion of salience gives rise to different obligatory mapping to grammatical functions. I don't know if you're familiar with
there are things old and new to grammatical functions. Off the top of my head, I don't know an example. Geraldine, do you know any examples where this is? It's certainly, in some languages, much more like in French, for instance, it is certainly more difficult than in English to get an indefinite subject. But again, it is not a categorical kind of stuff. So it might play more or less a role, right.
And I'm just wondering why there should, but there are certainly languages where the mapping between old versus new and linear order is quite strict. So,
right.
So, but the question is why there should be that difference?
That is a big, as I say, these production models, as I sketched them rather brutally, are extremely basic at this moment, kind of stuff. So a lot of more work needs to be done on that. So because I think that speculating with the little data that we have is maybe not the most productive thing. Maybe one should try to get more data and more reliable data before. But it is a mystery why you. So even if we say, okay, we have now the same factors, so in a certain sense we got out of the mystery of the categorical stuff in the sense of saying we have all these factors play a role in all languages, let's say, kind of stuff. Then we have the next mystery, why is it different, kind of stuff. And what we have always said in grammatical theory in a kind of a loose way is that languages choose what they grammaticalize, or more or less. Okay, so this is
right. But the question I'm asking is not just why do languages differ, but why are there certain ways in which certain languages seem not to be able to function?
You think that there are no languages where being old information would lead to a grammatical function?
Would necessarily correlate with, right? So where you had the Chamorro situation.
Right, with the thing. I'm not sure that that's true, because I didn't bring data, but if people that looked at this Silverstein hierarchy type of stuff, like for instance, the difference between first and second persons and third persons can lead to similar kind of thing, okay? So, so if you have, and that is something that is related to the discourse status, maybe not. So I'm not sure that you're right, but it is. It might. If it is true.
That's different though. First, second versus third.
It's different.
Property of the discourse.
It is different, and if it is true, then it is an interesting thing to ponder about.
But isn't the fact that they are presented as hierarchies saying exactly that you can't find the reverse pattern?
No, it's not saying that it's the reverse. It's
it is just
you
that
have
it's
a hierarchy.
not.
What can that hierarchy correspond to? What can it map to?
Oh, okay.
Right,
You were asking about the mapping.
Yes.
So it could not be. I should have looked at that.
I don't know.
I'm just thinking about this animacy stuff, but I should look at that stuff and see whether it is really a fact. And it would be interesting if it is that way. It might be because this old new is a less clear-cut maybe value than the animate, non-animate, although, you can make the animate, non-animate not clear-cut either, as you have seen, but maybe it in the way it works. But that's an interesting thing to look at. Okay, any other questions?
Well, so this is maybe a future research topic, but maybe you have something to say about it. It seems to me that if you think about this as a question of choosing among paraphrases, so a generation problem, you're saying there are a number of input variables, animacy and information structure and so on. And there might also be a few output variables, right? So one of them is the role that things get placed in by a movement. One is whether they topicalize, so what happens at the agar state. And then finally there are prosodic factors which also show up in the output. And so it seems like the interaction among those three.
Right, this is something that needs to be modeled then. And
yeah, I mean it's not. I have no intuition about whether there will be a difference between the book I gave her and the book I gave to her.
Yeah, that's still another
and,
right,
the book I gave.
There is still a lot of things. Right, yeah.
Which, do these interact, and how do they interact with stress? If you have prosodic marking of something, does that mean that it's less likely to be marked with grammatical function or linear order?
Yeah, there are a lot of other things to be done. I mean, this is it's not.
Let me ask a question, which I'm asking only to summarize the talk so that I can remember it in a few months from now. So what you're doing is you take all these sentences, there are noun phrases in them. Each noun phrase gets marked with whether it's animate or inanimate, whether it's old or new relative discourse, and a few other attributes. And each noun phrase also has a position in the linear order. And the first set of studies was how good a predictor are these attributes of its linear order.
Right, yeah.
And the second one was each noun phrase is either topicalized or non, or it has been left dislocated or hasn't. And again, the regression was to find out what are the predictors of topicalization.
Right.
And so that has been the methodology. And so if I want to abstract out all the linguistics and look at the regression problem you're solving, these are the given variables, and either the position in the or the race to win in the linear order is the predicted variable, or getting topicalized is the predicted variable.
Or the grammatical function. Okay.
And that I think answers Peter's question. So it's not that the discourse, newness in the discourse is ignored. The book is marked for whether it's new or old in the discourse. And then you forget that it's a book. And amongst all examples where there was an inanimate object and an animate subject and an animate object, some old, some new.
Oh yeah. Did you understand that I said that the old and new was not relevant for things? No, I didn't want to say that at all. I said all these factors are relevant, and all are relevant independently. I'm very sorry if I gave the impression that I said that only animacy was relevant for dative alternation. No, all the factors are relevant.
John gave a book to Mary. In some readings, this has to presume that the book is old. So the speaker can even if he wanted, he can't say this sentence.
No, that I do not agree with. Okay. Okay. I think that the way we mark things up excludes that interpretation. But I mean, that's the idea. Maybe you can show that we did something wrong, but that is. Okay.